Hello, everyone. Man, does it feel good to be back. You have no idea how much I miss just making content for each and every one of you out there. With that said, this week we're going to cover how to create and use a jig and fixture template from start to finish, including how to place it on your machine with machine simulation. So, with that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so I've already uploaded my files and opened them inside of Fusion 360. As you can see here over in my data panel, I have my actual vise, I have my riser, and then I have my dummy part that we can use as a good example later. The first thing I like to do personally is get the vise working. I also am going to wait till later to add my riser in this case in 5-axis, because I don't want to be able to lock everything down and prevent myself from using maybe different risers or using different vices on different risers. So we're going to start with the vise. So I have the vise open here. As you can see, it's already organized pretty good. I pulled this directly from the manufacturer website. However, the first couple of things that I've noticed is one, my timeline is not on at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and capture our design history. So we're going to right click at the top level and we're going to capture that design history, getting our timeline in place. Now with my timeline in place, I have the ability to go through and start to set up my assembly. So from here, a lot of this stuff is actually where it needs to be. So there's no reason to start moving things around. I'm going to jump directly into a rigid group. And what I'm going to rigid group is my vice jaw. And then as you're going to see over here on the left, I have my moving part of my jaw. So we want to put these two items together. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to right click and then go to repeat. I could also go from the toolbar. And again, we're going to repeat that with the other two components on the other side of my vise. So this is a dovetailed self-centering vise. So we can actually create those jaws. And just to make sure everything's kind of working the way I want it, I'm clicking and dragging these pieces apart. But again, the sliding and the jaw themselves are all joined together. So we're going to revert that back up on our toolbar. From here, let's go ahead and go down and we're going to do an as-built joint. Now, if you're not seeing as-built joint, you've already missed the first step, which was turn on the design history down at the bottom. So let's go ahead and do an as-built joint. I'm going to do a joint between the lower piece, which is the sliding part, and my base. And we're going to set that as a slider. And I'm going to set that based on this cylinder, which would normally be threaded based on your vise. And then again, just like we did with the rigid group, we're going to right click as built joint. Again, I'm going to do the lower piece. I'm going to do that to the base. And then my location, if I rotate around here, is going to be, again, that cylinder. So at this point, if I go ahead and try to move anything on this assembly, as you notice, my entire assembly is moving. And the reason for that is when we look at our origin, we're not actually fixed with that component in any way, shape, or form. So we could, by all means, do a grounded component. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and revert it back to its original position. But now by grounding, if you look at that little pin over here, if I move my jaw, they slide along that way. Now, let's revert that back. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unground. But down in my timeline, just for clean and neat purposes, I'm actually going to highlight holding control on both of those and delete them. And the reason for this is I would like to actually put my vise at the origin and orientate my XYZ all in one shot. So let's go ahead and create a joint. And this is not an as-built joint. This is just a standard joint. And I'm going to use the bottom of my vise. And then I'm going to go to my origin. And if you're currently not seeing your origin, as you can see on my screen, you can go ahead and turn this on over here in the design workspace. So there we just brought our vise down. If we're looking at our blue, which is Z, red, which is X, this is almost exactly how I would want that base orientated in my machine. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And now we can see I have my X, Y, Z direction is all set. I also have my vise base in position. And if I try to move my jaws now with nothing grounded, you can see how we can move those. But we're now going to take this one step higher. Again, we revert that back. And for neatness and cleanliness, I like to get the origin out of the way. So now what we need to do, because this is a self-centering vise, is we need both jaws to move simultaneous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to assemble, and we're going to go ahead and do a motion link. And what a motion link allows me to do is to grab those two joints and allow them to slide with each other back and forth. And what you're going to notice here is normally they're going in the same direction. However, if I reverse, they're actually going in and out, as you can see here, functioning as if it was a normal vise when you tighten it down and loosen it up. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And now let's test that. So if I grab one jaw and I pull it out, notice how my other jaw slides out with it. Very easy, very simple to do. And as you can see, that allows me to open and close that vise using motion link and a couple of joints. So now we're going to take this one step further. And what we're going to do is we're going to add our stock box into this. So how we're going to do so is we're going to go ahead and create a brand new component. And with that component, we're going to go ahead and call that stock. And what I'm going to do is I am actually just going to create a box. Very simple. I like to use the XY plane so that I can draw out whatever size box that is. And for some of you, you're probably questioning why my dimensions are in millimeters. I'm a firm believer that I rather use bald eagles. And the reason why we're in millimeters is because when I imported that vise, it actually set my unit to millimeters. So let's fix that. We're going to go up to document settings and we're going to change millimeters to inch. And as you can see, inch is my default. However, once we captured design history, that's when it brought in the millimeters. So if we were to take a step back now and go down to our timeline when we created that box and edit it, you can notice that one, these are all in millimeters, but if we are to change these to whatever we want to set it now, it will be recorded in inch. So again, we're going to go ahead and set this to 4, 3, and 2. Personally, I like to be able to use those dimensions just so I know visually which direction I'm moving. But our next step is going to be to place our stock on our vise. So I'm going to activate the top level just because it makes it a little easier to see and to work with everything going on. But if you haven't guessed yet, we're just going to go ahead and do a joint. And I'm going to go to the bottom of my stock in one of my edges. So little pro tip here, if you hold Control, it will lock you to that plane where it makes it easier to grab those nodes. And then I'm going to go to my vise. So this is where it's going to be personal preference more than anything. And a lot of people will say, how do I get it perfectly on this serrated edge? Well, again, I could go and set it up here on this top edge, and then I would manually have to lower it based on whatever that dimension is inside of my model. Me personally, it's not a big deal, and I don't mind having to do it this way. However, for this demonstration purpose, it's much easier just to grab that lower corner or that lower edge and place it just center on this flat. Again, if you're doing this on a normal vise or anything of that nature, you could also use that back edge in the corner of your vise and things of that nature. So again, we're going to go ahead and do our right click from before. We're going to repeat joint. Again, I'm going to go to the bottom side here, holding my Control and pick that edge. And then again, I want to be on this face, picking that center node and hit OK. So if everything has worked properly and we look at this from the side, you'll notice that I have 0.085 in both of my slider joints, and we are now sitting in our vise. Yes, I know there's a little bit of a gap here. It's not the biggest deal because even if I was running a 5-axis and tool clearance, I'd rather actually have my jaw stick out a little bit as a secondary precaution when we machine sim. So from here, let's go ahead and see how we can actually improve on this, right? We want to be able to adjust our stock. So I'm going to go down to change parameter. And what you're going to get is this parameter table. And what we're looking for in the parameter table is this one called stock. Now, it's up to you all how you do this. I think it's personally easier as if I just favorite these items because all I really care about is being able to set my stock sizes. Now, you can actually create user parameters. Again, very, very valuable at the end of the day if you want to make this even easier on somebody. So let's go ahead and create a user parameter. So this is going to be my stock height. So I'm going to call it stock H, and I would like my stock to be 3 inches tall. Now I'm going to repeat this a few more times. So we now have stock width, and then that is going to be, let's go ahead with 8 inches, and then stock depth. And lastly, let's just go ahead and chalk that up to 5 inches. So now that we've done that, we need to actually plug this name right here into our dimensions on our part. So for example, my stock height, if you remember, we did this based on a 2, 3, 4. So if I'm looking here, this looks like the 2-inch. So the height of my stock is where my 2-inch is. So if we start to type, we're going to get predictive. So there's my stock height. Now, when I click off of this, you're going to notice my stock just jumped up. So now my stock width of 8, that is going to go into my stock 4-inch mark that we made. And then lastly, if you haven't guessed, stock height, oh, nope, stock depth. We all make mistakes, right? It's a common part of this world. And we're plugging in that last variable. So now that I've done so, this should be fully controllable in any dimension I want. So if I wanted a 4-inch tall, 8-inch long, 2-inch wide piece of material, just like that, we've adjusted that and set that inside of Fusion 360. Now, in my opinion, instead of favoriting these down at the bottom, I would actually favorite these ones up at the top. And then I have those based off anybody and everybody that's going to use this file. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And now let's just do a little bit of cleanup work. Personally, I'm going to right click the stock and I like to set the opacity down to around 20% so that when we start to place our part inside of here later, we have that visually. Another fun thing I like to do is I like to go into my joints and I'm actually going to turn off all of my joints. So I'm doing that at that top level because visually I don't need to see the actual joints when I'm working with this model. So let's go ahead and save this. So now that we have that saved, I'm going to go ahead and open up my data panel. We're going to notice that I have my vise set up with parameters and stock to control, and I still have my riser. So let's build out my template file. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start a brand new design, and this is going to be my jig and fixture temp. Again, you guys can order label this any way that you like. But with that being said, I can now start to build out my actual assembly of my jig and fixture. So again, this is personal preference how you do this. I do like to think a little bit more organized at the end of the day. So I'm going to put my riser and my vise in one component to start with. So let's create a brand new component. And this will be, I'm just going to call it my assembly or ASM, as you may see. And with that activated, I can now bring in my vise. And you're going to see that drop in and load. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring in my riser. So we've talked about a couple of very critical steps. I'm going to go ahead and drag this away so that we can get everything placed after the fact and that they're not overlapping each other. But if we expand out our assembly, you're going to notice that these are linked. This is a very important thing that this vise, we're going to change it from time to time, but we don't want those changes to go back to our original design. So we're going to go ahead and break that link. Now, when we start to talk about the actual riser, odds are you guys aren't going to modify the riser. So whether or not it's linked is up to you. Personal opinion, again, I'm going to go ahead and break that link. But now we can start to build out our full assembly. So let's go ahead and get our vise onto our riser. So again, we're going to go ahead and do a joint. We're going to go to the bottom of our vise, and we're going to place that on the top of our riser. And in the case of this, as you can see, more than likely, I have my locking mechanism here on the right. So if that is going to be sitting in your machine and you want your locking mechanism for that pallet or that interchange to the right, you could leave it to the right. Me personally, I'm going to just rotate everything so it's always facing the front where I have everything to do. And just like that, everything snapped down and put together in assembly. Now, again, this is the fun of Fusion 360, is notice how my origin is in kind of a weird or different place. This is 100% up to you where you all place your origin. I would say I would place it top dead center of my stock if I'm working with a machine that has DWO or DFO or tilted work plane, anything of that nature. Now, if you're not doing that, you may want to place it at bottom center of your jig. And just like we did that when we initially built our vise and tested motion, all we have to do is create another joint. So we're going to go ahead and do a joint from the top. And I'm going to put that on the origin. And if you're not seeing your origin, as you can see with my orange planes here and my axes, again, you're going to want to turn on the origin at the top level, not the origin in the assembly level. But as you can see, it flipped my part up. My Z is actually positive in my part. I don't want that. So we're going to hit flip, and then we're going to hit OK. And now what you're going to notice is everything kind of jumbled around and we can get repositioned. One thing that I did make a mistake on is my X-axis right now is pointing towards this side of my vise, which would not actually be the way I would want it in my machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my timeline. I'm going to right click and edit joint. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate 90 degrees. So in this case, that's 180. From when we flipped it down, I can go ahead and rotate here. And as you're going to see, I completely mistakenly did that the wrong way. And the reason why that's the wrong way is if you think about it, I rotated my vise on my actual tombstone or my actual riser. So I'm going to push Control Z to undo that. And you'll notice it snaps back real quick. I need to edit the actual rigid joint we did here. So again, I'm going to right click and edit this one. And now I'm going to rotate that so that red line signifies my X-axis and my stock runs along X. And then the green being my Y-axis runs away from me. So now again, I like to clean things up a little bit, but this is where it's going to get tricky. So I don't want to turn all the joints off. I just want to turn that rigid joint off so that I can place a joint origin at the bottom if you like to use the fixture settings in Machine Sim. So again, this is something that based on a templated file, I'm going to put a joint origin down here at the bottom. And from there, again, we're going to orientate that joint origin so that it matches what I would say is our world coordinates or how you have everything set up. So again, as I did that bottom center of my actual jig, and I can go ahead and hit OK. And then lastly, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this origin here and have everything set. So from here, we have the ability to save this file and use this in any way that we choose moving forward. So again, the idea is if I go into my parameters table and I go ahead and adjust my stock, again, those are my user parameters versus my favorites. And let's just say we're going to go now to a 3.5 just to test this. And I want to go 7. And then lastly, I want to go 1.75. What you're noticing is my stock is fully updating as I go through that. I am noticing here that I have a joint still turned on. So let's go ahead and turn off that joint via that little button right there. And again, for neat and organization, I like to close everything up and just hit save. So let's now see this in action, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my part and let's get this file opened up. And now I'm going to insert into my part my jig and fixture. But this is where things get a little tricky. So this is going to be something that you're going to have to make the decision on, because as you can see here is this component is my actual part, my assembly. So do I want to put my jig into this file, or do I want to start a new file to create my operations? And me personally, I would usually just do a brand new file and bring everything in there. Again, keeping everything neat and organized. So again, is what we're going to do is we're going to save this, and this is going to be my dummy part 1, and we're going to go ahead and save that, and then we can bring everything in, and you'll see how this organizes out why I prefer this way at the end of the day. So here's my part, and then here's my jig and fixture. And the important part here is this is where I'm actually going to break the link on my jig and fixture, because I don't want any changes that I do to this model pushing back to my original template. However, my part, if my customer tends to do a lot of rev changes and things, I would like to be able to incorporate those changes as I go. But for most of you out there, you're probably going to guess this here is I'm going to now place my part on my stock where I roughly want it. And I'm going to do so with a joint. So let's go ahead and turn off our jig so we can grab an edge here. We did lock out that this part has a nice flat at the top. And I'm going to go ahead and now rotate back around, and I'm going to place that over here on the back side of my stock. So now you can see my part's not turned on. I turn the visual back on so I can see where it's at. Again, we're upside down, so we're going to go ahead and flip. do a little bit of rotating. And then for those of you that do machining, you realize that you probably want to be in off the edge a little bit. That's a little overkill. So maybe we go 0.1. And then from there, we're also going to go down negative 0.1. And we have our part set. So as you can see here, my stock is too small, not the biggest deal at this moment. The main idea was getting my part in position and then based on that position being able to adjust. So let's go ahead and go into our parameter table. Here's my parameter table. As you guys remember, I can adjust everything and anything here. Let's go ahead and go to a 4.5 tall piece of stock. We need it roughly maybe 7.5 long. Oh, just a little bit longer than that. And then, wrong dimension here. Let's go ahead and change that to 8. And then let's go 2 inches. So again, what I'm looking for here is to make sure that my part is fully within that rectangle in any direction so that when we machine this, we can get that down to whatever we need and set up our operations. So again, that's just getting our part set, placing our part, and now going into the machining side of it. So I'm going to go ahead and switch from design to manufacture. And in our manufacture area, again, for those of you probably have done this a couple of times, we need to create our setup. So here's the important thing in your setup now is we're going to go ahead and utilize anything and everything that we've built in this model to our advantage. So the first thing we want to do is select our model for machining. And again, you could do that by selecting the model here, but if you notice my stock box is in the way. So I'm going to expand this out just a little bit, and I'm going to grab my dummy part component. I'm going to turn on my fixture, right? So I want everything in my jig and fixture. However, what I don't want is my stock, so I'm going to unselect that. So let's go ahead and expand that out a few levels. And then you're going to see here is we do have all of our stuff here. And this component here gives us everything. And then my fixture attachment point, which is nice, can be that joint origin. Moving over to our stock, we're going to go from a solid, and that solid is right here. And lastly, I like to now go back and add my machine. Again, in my opinion, I usually tend to hit OK, visually check everything before I get really crazy feedback and errors based off putting it on the machine in the wrong way. You could always go back and edit this. So let's select our machine now. For the sake of what we're doing here is I'm going to go ahead and grab a UMC 750. In this case, I'm actually going to grab a different one because as you can see, I have yet to download. So let's go ahead and grab one from my local. And then now we're going to look at our part position if reference to our actual machine. So as you're seeing is we're using a fixture box point. And again, as you can use that joint origin. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight and select that origin. A little tricky here as I zoom in and zoom out. And then I'm going to pick my table attachment. And just like that, we have set that part on the table, ready to run. Now, if you're like me and you don't like the machine and everything in the way as we're looking at this visually, we can go down to the machine. We could actually say show machine, don't show machine. It's up to you all. We could set it as transparent. Transparent tends to work a little better. But the reason why that's showing up is because when you click the setup, it actually populates. But that is a quick rundown on how you can actually get your part, place your part, use a template file. So later when I do this, all I have to do is throw my part into the template file and I'm ready to rock and roll. Before I let you all go on another Friday afternoon, I'm first going to ask you, please like this video. From that, don't forget to subscribe to get all updates on new content as we're going to be releasing several new videos next week. And from that, any suggestions or any parts that you want to see or any workflow you want to see, please leave a comment below to help me better this channel. Thank you all. Have a great Friday.